The sirens started before dawn, a rising metallic wail that slid through bedroom windows in the border towns and across the Vistula. Moments later, the first explosions rolled over rooftops. In the gray half-light of September 1st, 1939, bombs fell on the Polish town of Wielun and the Westerplatte depot at Gdansk almost at the same hour. Windows blew inward. People ran into streets powdered with brick and dust. On the Baltic, the German battleship Schleswig-Holstein opened fire, her shells walking across warehouses where Polish guards grabbed rifles and tried to breathe through smoke. In the air, the scream of Stuka dive sirens cut against the thud of impacts. The war that would pull in the world began with those sounds. For months, tension had been a visible thing. Radio speeches hardened into ultimatums. German troops massed along the frontier, armor parked in woods and fields. In August, Berlin and Moscow signed a non-aggression pact whose secret protocol drew a line across a map of Eastern Europe. If war came, the agreement said, Poland would be divided. In late August, a staged radio incident at a station near Gleiwitz handed Germany its pretext. By nightfall on August 31st, German units stood on their start lines. At dawn, they crossed. The German plan relied on speed and coordination. Columns of tanks and motorized infantry drove at key road hubs and river crossings, while the Luftwaffe cut rail lines and hammered airfields. Radio kept units in touch in a way that older armies could not match. The word Blitzkrieg was not yet doctrine on paper, but the effect looked like it. Armored spearheads pushing deep while infantry and artillery pressed the flanks. Polish forces, spread to guard a long border and protect cities, faced simultaneous blows from East Prussia, Pomerania, Silesia, and Slovakia. At Westerplatte, a few hundred Polish soldiers held out for 7 days. They fought in sand and brick dust, using buried ammunition and a network of guard posts to blunt repeated assaults from Marines and troops landed from barges. In the forests near Mokra, Polish cavalry brigades, mounted troops who fought largely on foot with modern anti-tank rifles, ambushed German armor moving along a rail line, knocking out tanks and buying a day with mines, fire discipline, and knowledge of the ground. The myth of lancers charging tanks grew from confusion and propaganda. The reality was tougher and more methodical. Wherever the terrain favored defenders and the timelines were measured in hours, Polish units made the Germans pay. But the skies belonged to the Luftwaffe almost from the first day. Polish fighter squadrons fought hard in the opening week and claimed kills, yet they were outnumbered and outpaced. Bombers worked road junctions and bridges, ripped up communications and cratered runways. Refugee columns moved along the same roads military convoys needed, and every crowd slowed the retreat or redeployment of a unit that had to be somewhere else by morning. Warsaw tried to absorb the shock and still function. Air raid wardens directed people to cellars. Hospitals set up extra beds in corridors. The government kept to a schedule of announcements. The army tried to execute its fallback plan toward the Vistula and the line of the San River. An early counterattack at the Tukola forest failed to dislodge German spearheads pushing down from East Prussia. Rail schedules broke under pressure. Bridges went down too soon or too late. In the second week, German columns reached the outskirts of the capital and began to encircle it. Then, on the Bzura River west of Warsaw, the Polish army struck back. Under General Tadeusz Kuterzeba, 2 Polish armies pivoted and attacked the German flank, hitting surprise divisions and pushing them back across fields trampled by earlier movement. For several days in mid-September, the Bzura rang with artillery and the clash of maneuver neither side had expected. The counterattack forced Germany to divert armor and air to contain it. When it failed from the air and from exhaustion, but it bought Warsaw time and pulled prisoners and stragglers out of pockets that would have closed sooner. On September 17th, the horizon changed. Soviet forces crossed Poland's eastern frontier in accordance with the secret line agreed to in August. Red Army columns rolled toward Wilno, Grodno, and Lwów. Polish units already engaged in a losing defense against Germany had to decide whether to turn, surrender to the Soviets, or try to reach Romania or Hungary. The government ordered a withdrawal to avoid a hopeless two-front fight. From that day, the map could no longer be saved. The invasion had become a partition. Warsaw endured siege and daily bombardment. People hauled water from pumps after mains broke. Fire crews fought with little pressure. Barricades went up in the streets. Civil defense teams cleared glass and bandaged cuts, while artillery walked in from the suburbs. The city's defenders, regulars, police, volunteers, shuttled between strongpoints. On September 28th, after weeks of shelling and dwindling supplies, the capital capitulated. Modlin Fortress, which had stood since earlier wars, held a day longer. Isolated units kept moving south and east. Some reached the border and crossed. Others were surrounded and forced to lay down arms. At Koch in early October, General Franciszek Kleeberg led the last organized battle of the campaign. His units, pieced together from reserves and training formations, fought 4 days against 2 German corps and then surrendered when ammunition finally ran out. By October 6th, the campaign had ended in formal terms. The Polish state had not signed a peace, but its armies were no longer able to fight as armies. The Polish Navy had already sent destroyers to Britain before the war opened, and pilots who escaped by way of Romania or the Baltic would later wear RAF wings. Resistance at home began with the first patrols on the first day and would last until the war's final months. The cost of the campaign came in lists and in the way cities looked when the smoke cleared. Military dead numbered in the tens of thousands on each side. Civilian casualties in Poland mounted sharply from bombardment and strafing that did not distinguish uniforms from crowds. Wielan became one of the first names of the war's toll on non-combatants, and not the last. The speed of the collapse did not come from a lack of will. Poland entered the war knowing it faced 2 powerful neighbors and counted on time and allies. On September 3rd, Britain and France declared war on Germany. In the West, a limited offensive moved into the Saar, then halted. The main effort stayed on paper. In the East, Poland absorbed the impact alone. German troops marked their advance with road signs turned and boundary stones uprooted. In the free city of Gdansk, Nazi officials declared incorporation. Across western Poland, the occupiers began the arrests and executions that would expand into broader crimes as the war widened. In the east, Soviet authorities rounded up officers and officials and pushed them into trains. Families watched men disappear into systems with new rules and no appeal. The campaign also set patterns that held for years. Radios directed armor and aircraft in a coordinated rhythm. The pace of movement outran the ability of slower units to recover strong lines. Cities became targets and symbols. Law bent first, then broke. The myth of cavalry against tanks took on a life because it turned a complicated defeat into a parable. The reality was that Polish cavalry fought mostly dismounted, used anti-tank weapons effectively when they had them, and were pushed aside by weight and speed in air and ground they could not match. By the end of the month, new flags flew over police stations and post offices. New currencies were posted in shop windows. New uniforms stood in doorways where old ones had fallen. Refugees moved along shoulders with bundles and children, heading anywhere that was not the last place they had slept. The sounds of the first day, sirens and shells, echoed in smaller ways. The bang of a door in a stairwell, the sudden silence after a distant plane cut its engine to dive. What remained for Poland after the campaign were 2 paths: exile and underground. A government in exile formed in France and later in London. Pilots who had learned in Polish schools flew hurricanes and Spitfires. Soldiers regrouped as the war spread and fought under different banners on distant fronts. At home, an underground state grew with schools, newspapers, and an army that waited and struck where it could. The September campaign had ended. The war for the country did not. In the photographs taken at the time, you can read the sequence without a caption. A streetcar frozen on tracks buckled by blast, a row of helmets on a wall outside a field hospital, a road sign pointing to a town that no longer lay inside the same country. In a few frames from the coast, Westerplatt's guardhouses stand blackened and low, their edges still sharp. In others, the Bzura runs brown past fields dotted with abandoned wagons. The faces that look back are tired and drawn. They are not surprised by the end of that month, only by how fast a plan on paper became a line across a map and then a wall in the mind. When the first siren rose before dawn, most people thought it was another exercise, another test. When the blasts followed, they understood. A month later, when the guns stopped long enough for orders to be read, the map had been split. The piece that had seemed, days earlier, like a fact of life had become a memory framed by rubble. Thank you for listening to Last Post History. Subscribe for more true stories from the world at war.